Hey everyone, thanks for coming. I'm Rob Murray, I'm your local section chair. We've got a good turnout. A couple things to go over. Next month we will be meeting on the 24th at UT. We'll do a quick tour of the facilities and then it'll be a little bit more of a social thing. We'll get it to hang out because I think not everybody knows each other and it's a good thing. And then SSL will be sending a representative to talk about workflows on August 28th. Should be the thing. Tonight's a great panel. And as soon as Jay is ready, Jay Yeary is going to be moderating, and I will hand off the microphone to him. Thank you.
5 most wanted list. I told you it was going to happen.
Hello. So I've only been in this area a few years, and I spent a long time in the Southeast working in the Atlanta area, and moved here, didn't really know anybody. And I've got to tell you, especially we started putting this panel together, there are so many amazing people, so many amazing engineers that have done such great work. And I asked these guys for bios, and Malcolm got me one. And then Greg got me one, you know. So I'm on the internet and I'm looking these guys up, so they're going to hear what the internet has to say about it. It's all good. It's all good. But I'm just amazed at the talent that's in this area. And I had no idea. I knew Austin was a music town. I have learned so much about how vast and varied the audio industry is here. It is not just a music town. It is a broadcast town. It's a gaming town. It's a live audio town. It's the audio industry here is amazing. And I'm so glad that we're all starting to get back together again. So now I'm going to read some bios that will hopefully be embarrassing. Bill Johnson. So Bill and I talked earlier because you know how hard it is to find someone named Bill Johnson on the internet. You also have to be careful how you type things. Anyway.
Google Sunshine.
Yeah. So Bill built a recording truck in 1980, and he's been running that since. For 26 years, he's been mixing. He's been recording
KGSR
CDs
series.
Benefiting charity for 26 years. Owns Austin Riverside Sound.
Well, no, it's gone now.
It's gone.
Yeah.
Owned. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was on South Congress. Yeah, South Congress today for lunch. Somebody dragged me there. I don't know how anything stays open here. You can't get anywhere. Owns Austin Records. Okay, and helped build Terra Nova Digital.
Did.
All right, cool. Malcom Harper. Now, Malcolm sent me info, so this is long. Malcolm is the owner and president of Reelsound Recording Company, a mobile audio broadcast. I did edit this, believe it or not. Mobile audio broadcast mixing and recording service based in Austin. Provided services, Reelsound has provided services for Austin City Limits, Austin City Limits Music Festival, the South by Southwest Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo music performances, and ABC Disney 4th of July Freedom Over Texas. He is the live engineer for the Netflix taping of Mo Amer. So,
comedian.
Who is Mo Amer?
You know, I don't know. We got a call about a month ago. We need an engineer to record this guy named Mo Amir.
Mo Amir, okay.
Yeah. And I went, okay. So I'll find out this week. We're taping it
at the
Wednesday,
Paramount.
Thursday.
Yes. Upcoming live music broadcasts include the 2018 Houston, I think we talked about that, 4th of July Freedom Over Texas for ABC and Disney. He's artist, oh, maybe I did edit this too much. something about the Mavericks and Chris Young. Maybe.
Those are the two performers on the 4th of July
Okay.
show.
All right. 14 of Malcolm's projects have been nominated for Grammys, and 5 have won. He has served on the Recording Academy's Texas chapter as president, trustee, and is currently a governor and soon to be emperor. After a while, you just get to be emperor. He is a member of the Latin Recording Academy and Audio Engineering Society. Thank you for being a member of the Audio Engineering Society. All right, who's next? David Hough, who also didn't send me a bio. So, David, in case you don't know, is the audio director for Austin City Limits. I dug some stuff up on you too. So. He has been with Austin City Limits since the pilot, and is the person who has been there the longest on staff, correct?
Yes.
He is a UT Austin engineering graduate and was a drummer in the UT jazz band.
Correct.
The internet does not lie. David is also a that's ridiculous. The internet does not lie. David is also a Tech Award winner, and you worked with someone I know, Morgan Martin.
Yes.
I did
We're
not
still
know
in
that.
touch.
That's good. I have
You
not
should
seen
be here
him.
tonight. I wish you were here.
He should, but he lives
He's
in
in Los
California.
Angeles,
Yeah, yeah.
Working on his pipe organ.
Yeah, I was gonna say. He has a pipe organ in his house.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Don't
Um,
Does it operate with flying faders?
SSL?
All right, so, Greg, you sent me something.
Mhm.
So, Greg is an engineer producer for the well, I can't talk anymore. University of Texas Longhorn IMG radio network, and has been for the past 26 years. Has been an independent, freelance, self-employed audio engineer and technician since 1988. Did I say that already?
Yep.
Oh, okay. And does classical music live remote work, including the Festival Institute at Round Top for 15 years, the La Jolla Chamber Music Festival for 4 years, and has recorded hundreds of college and high school bands, choir and orchestra concerts, and contests. Fair enough?
Fair enough.
And he is a gear guy. After talking with him a little bit, man likes gear, which is, I'm there. All right, Chet Himes. The internet had something to say. I liked it. I liked this. So this is literally what this says. This is from a 2012 Austin Chronicle article. Quick, connect the dots between, did you see this article?
I don't know.
Christopher Cross and Ghostland Observatory using San Antonio psychedelia, which is a weird word, as a reference. Answer, engineer Chet Himes. So Christopher Cross, Ghostland Observatory, and San Antonio psychedelia, which I didn't even know was a thing.
Neither did I. That's a Margaret Moser article and stuff. She
Yeah,
got a name.
well, you were in a band, apparently a psychedelic music band. of some
Yeah,
sort.
in the 60s, yes. I was a bass player.
It's called Homer.
Yeah, right.
I've actually got the record.
And I recently heard some of the original recordings from back then and realized that through the years that I am the bass player that I hate.
Well, Chet has also worked with a couple of people, including Carole King, Joe Ely, Jerry Jeff Walker, Gary Nunn, Guy Clark, and Eric Johnson. So that's your panel for this evening. So where shall we start? How about we talk about what it was like when you guys started? What technology was like, what the work was like, what it was like working with artists back then, because all of that's different now.
A lot has changed over the years. I mean, the
before we all even met, we were all in our own worlds, dinking around with electronics and sound and music and playing. I mean, a lot of it was just like, okay, I'm in a garage band in high school. We don't have any budget or money or equipment. Let's build our own speakers. That kind of thing. There was not a music store at the corner that you could just go in like Guitar City or whatever to pull together your PA. We ended up building a lot of our stuff that we bought mail order and threw it together with little 6-channel mixers. And from that, you know, we just kind of got the bug and the love for it. And eventually we got to know one another. And I mean, I went from playing drums to trying to find a day job and ended up working for the public broadcasting station. And they said, well, we need to do, you know, it'd be fun to do a recording of musicians, because we got a lot of those in town, and we had this new facility. And I suggested, you know, at the time that Malcolm was building up his Streamline truck to do remotes, and that his mixing board and tape machine were in storage. So it just happened to time out that his equipment was available, and Chet and Greg and others helped pitch in to bring that stuff up the elevator, hook it all up, and we did a couple of pilots within a few days of each other with B.W. Stevenson, and then Willie Nelson came in after that. And we threw together a little edited show, sent that to PBS, and they said, oh, can you do 10 more of those? Yeah. Then we ended up buying equipment to try to build up that studio.
Yeah, I think a lot of what was going on then was that none of us really had a lot of work. We were kind of scratching around for whatever we could find here. And I was at the time working with Chet, and Greg was coming in as an intern about that time, and we had some equipment that was available. So my first remote recording was a little bit of what I had, a little bit of what somebody else had, and what we could rent between us and put together. And I was, you know, had always been doing remotes, but not to the scale that I could once I got with people that had some equipment that I couldn't afford at the time. And so we basically put together a remote rig. We had a studio available to us, and we were able to, for several years, be able to do what I call kind of serious remote recording for either radio shows or television pilots or films, anything that might pop up like that that was happening. And these were the years from about 1971 to 76. So there was things going on here. A lot of musicians were moving into town. Those were the years of the Cosmic Cowboy influx. You know, Willie moved into town, and like I said, Jerry Jeff and Michael Murphy. And so we had talent here, and there was, you know, enough studios that they could find a place to work. But again, it was really kind of a joint effort between a lot of people. It wasn't any one person that kind of said, hey, I've got everything, come to me. It was more of a, here's a conglomerate of people, and we were able to attract the kind of clientele. And, you know, great engineers. Chet had just moved in here from San Antonio, and he probably anticipated or helped influence Christopher Cross to come to town at the time.
Well, no, I moved to Austin with Chris to do his music. And at the studio that we had, or came to, I came in as, you know, there was no such thing as being paid to do it, so it was a glorious hobby. And that, you know, being young and enthusiastic, we did that so that we had, based out of that studio, that when Chris moved up here, that we had an Ampex 8-track in San Antonio. So the band that I was in finished an album on that. We sold that and bought an MCI console and brought that up to Austin. And that's what we would load into the back of a truck, with a 16-track a tape machine that's as big as 2 4x8 sheets of plywood. Weighed 10,000 pounds at least. Yeah. But that, you know, everywhere we would go, we would build a control room, take everything there. And you know, I don't think we've changed, have we, Bill? We still do that, don't we?
We build it, set it up, tear down, set it up right.
Well, the last, Malcolm, one of the more recent gigs in the last 10 years or so, Malcolm had, we were at the music hall, is that where it was? The music hall, and it was Chuck, where you had the AMD super
Ainley.
cool computer.
Right. Chuck Ainley, one of the
Was there
engineers.
one that the C3 had hired me to record this thing for Starbucks.
For Will.
So they'd hired me, but they showed up. So Bill and myself have got two 24-track HD recorders. And we're sitting on milk crates.
In a broom closet.
In a broom closet, right, with preamps stacked everywhere. And Willie's getting ready to go on stage, and then Malcolm's out in the truck. He's got his Reelsound truck out there. And we're sitting there getting ready to punch the recorders, and the manager for Willie opens the door and goes, "Who are these guys? Get them out of here, unplug them." I'm being paid to be here. So we still do that. 45 years later, we're still lugging shit around and putting it in a
The four-way split that night.
Yeah, and Greg was gonna have to split, so.
I'm the youngster up here. I was assisting for Chet. I interned at a studio called Odyssey Sound. It was at 308 West 6th Street. It's a big hotel now, I think. And there's 2 rooms, saying the main room had a custom-built 24 input, 24 monitor. It was a split monitor, console monitor off to the right-hand side, like a lot of the old ones, Tridents and things were. And it was all a locally produced endeavor. You know, the whole thing, from the metalwork, the circuitry. I worked on, that was the first large format console I ever worked on. Everybody up here, I think, soldered on that thing to put the printed circuit boards together, slide it in. Everything underneath connected with Cinch Jones connectors, for those of you familiar with that, daisy chain between everything. There's a lot of it with discrete mic freeze, bior input transformers, and the output stages that were running off bipolar 36-volt supplies. The line amps were running on the same thing. So you could check off the patch bay, I could plug it into an Aratone, and the preamp would drive an Aratone to some level at least. You had to see if that was where the problem was, and the line amps would do the same thing. The EQ was actually designed by a guy here in Austin who's a member and a former officer of the AES, Bob Thurmond, who's written an unbelievable number of papers and stuff, but it was an old classic LCR, 3-band equalizer with switched. But the cutest thing about it is all 3 bands could be activated individually. So you could just put the highs in or just the lows. And as was typical for those days, it's a little bit different because it was running off of op amps. The EQ was actually post-fader. The MCI that Chet and Christopher Cross had worked the same way. So rather than have it pre-fade to where the front end would get crushed if you ran it up too hot, it was post-fade. But a lot of consoles were that way then. And I was an intern for him, and then later, he had actually started an equipment company, which is the first professional audio sales and service company in this neck of the woods.
Well, it's like you said, you had to do a lot of things to make a living. And so,
Yeah.
that we're housed in the studio was Reelsound, kind of opposite out of there, the Spirit Sound, which was a live sound company, and the studio. And then we decided that we needed better equipment, so the guy that was the business manager, I guess, reached out to MCI and we ended up being an MCI Sony dealer, so we could buy consoles and tape machines
For
and sell
yourself,
them.
for
Yeah.
yourself.
I could use them for a while and then sell them. Benefited a lot of people. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. But
Well, in those
order-
days,
you know,
he's right, keeping it 6 months and selling it was a huge deal for our clients. I ran the equipment company for Chet and his other partner, and it all had other things to do. Chet had set up, like JBL Crown and most of the other, Neumann, most of the other dealerships, and a guy named Steve Shields had gotten the MCI dealership, some other things, so we were responsible for sales and service, but the stuff was just unbelievably expensive. And if you can think about any of the, you people are here at 78, 79, 80, think about the inflation. We were getting 4 price sheets a year. They're raising prices quarterly. Oh, you know, I bought my house in '81 on a 16% note, so that gives you an idea. Equipment was outrageous. So, you know, at least we had cash flow, and that's all the bank cared about. We didn't have to have money as long as we had cash flow. Cash flow made the world work, so we could use things and move them on to clients that could never afford to buy them new. But a lot of the time, you know, the studio was turning stuff, and not just our studio, but other clients that could afford it. You know, we could turn at 6 months and a year, and because of what was called the investment tax credit back then, you hold for a year and you could write it off. And it was a credit, not a deduction. This is a tax credit. That went away in about '84.
And is that when you closed it? No.
No, the equipment company kept going until about '88, but believe me, after that, on high-end stuff is when the business was dominated by leasing companies than to do it for a lot of people.
And equipment was so, I mean, everything was not just, I mean, it wasn't just inflation, everything was ridiculously expensive. I mean, professional equipment was not like it is now.
An MCI 24 track, a JH24, in the early to mid-'80s, $36,000 list. They hit the street usually around 30 to 32. So that gives you an idea.
Yeah.
An MCI JH500 that we used at Pecan Street, the 38 input one was $1 1/4. $125,000 for it. 2 tracks, good grief, about 6,500 a pop, 7,000, those are MCIs. And we were selling them because the Studer was 45,000.
Right.
And we were selling them because an Ampex was, the ATR, good God, was about 60. And so the world was, MCI was budget, basically then, and as you can tell, it wasn't much of a budget. A budget multi-track studio back then was, you could, not counting, real estate or anything, but you could put a budget thing together for maybe about 150. The first console that he had with Christopher Cross was an MCI JH416, which was actually sort of the first mass-produced console. It was a standardized frame, held 24 input modules. They were often short-loaded to 16, and it would sell with a 16-track tape recorder that when it first was introduced as the MCI JH10, then came the JH100, the JH16. But they could put a package together of those two for $30,000. And that was their start, which at that point in time was a revelation. It was just unbelievably cheap. And when you think that it would take the time when I graduated from school thinking, hey, I had been thinking about going into the military. I was a military brat, and a second lieutenant was making $6,000 a year. So,
So then, the equipment cost more than it cost to go to college.
oh yes.
And it costs more than
Many,
your
many
house,
costs,
and
yeah.
now college costs, well,
Yeah.
anyway.
No,
So
but-
let's talk about now, what things are like now. David, did you
Well,
have something?
to follow up on that, I was gonna have a Morgan Martin story
Okay,
about when Austin City Limits was first starting to buy equipment at about 1974, 75. And it was Morgan Martin that stepped up to the folks that control the monies for the nonprofit, which is very tight. And he was saying we need to buy a Neve, which was the most expensive one out there. So they looked at the 16-channel Neve, and it had these in 1975 money. It was like $36,000, and we couldn't fill in all the buckets with all the compressors we wanted. So we bought like one compressor this year and another compressor 5 years later. And that board was sold 12 years later for $36,000, the exact same amount of money that the station paid for it originally. But also, to save money then, the chief engineer, since we had a wood shop down in the basement, decided that we weren't gonna buy monitor speakers, we were gonna build them in-house and go across the street to Radio Shack and buy the little 12-inch woofers at Radio Shack. And I'm like, no, we need to get, pro stuff that'll last, like JBL. I have friends that build these things, like Dean Rayburn or whoever. And no, he insisted on it. So when we did Willie Nelson, and his sister, Bobby, plays piano. Morgan Martin went to the same church as she did, where she played piano. So he was friends with hers, they were chatting up, and the speaker was set up right next to her. It caught on fire. So I was like, okay, let's make a few phone calls. We won't use that anymore.
to put it into perspective, that $36,000 console did not have a multi-track monitoring section in it. That was outboard.
Yep.
They had a little level pan, 19-inch rack mount thing outboard.
And the Studer that we bought,
Wide.
16-track, was used. It had recorded Eat a Peach. And when it showed up, the wiring was all crossed up, and Jay got to rewire it out in radio recording down with the KUT folks. That was a mess, but we still have that machine. Don't tell UT.
To his credit, though, the
Yes.
chief engineer later on realized that really wasn't a mistake.
Oh, absolutely.
He-
But it's a good story.
Can't lay that on Dante again.
so you want to talk about how things have changed, and how you guys are working now? I know you guys said you're still schlepping gear around,
Right.
so that part hasn't changed.
Well, we do.
But the weight of it probably has changed.
Bill and myself still do a lot of things together, and we take just about everything we own, I think, every time we go, so.
If it takes 2 briefcases, we take 12. We've got silver cases, it's all a kit. You undo the kit, you use it, you put it back the same way. We
Right.
teach our kids that work with us, that's the most important part, is the kit has to
Keep the
go
kit.
back as a kit, so we'll know where it is next time.
It's funny that no matter what, that we in, was it 98 or 99 that we did Big Jam?
Yeah,
Started doing
98, 99,
internet
2000.
broadcasting live from the Saxon Pub. And what you call it, high def stream was about the size of your thumb, or thumbnail, the picture. We had a couple of cameras, 3 cameras and a switcher, that were all semi-pro, I guess, but we had to do the exact same thing, no matter what. The audio, no matter how good the video or how bad the video, we had to do the exact same thing. So that over the years, we've gathered together a kit, or several kits, that will allow broadcast audio to get to the right place in a number of ways.
I carry more video adapters than the video guys, always.
It's not their job,
No.
their audio work.
They can care less.
And then we do like stubs or,
Well, with Stubbs, we bounced it off the, that gold building downtown and then hit the bird all the way in Dallas. That was quite an experiment.
but we do the same thing as we did with Malcom to start out with, to load all the shit in the back of a truck, drive a truck, build a control room, add the video at the tail. Yeah. And the guys
And
go,
camera people don't show up until 10 minutes before the show, so Chet and I just finally decided, okay, we'll run their lines for them, because we're not gonna play this game. So we're out there at noon, running all the video lines, all the comm lines, all of that, top to bottom, to guarantee that it went off.
well, then they had to carry a camera around for an hour and a half, so they were worn out.
Yeah. And they didn't wrap the wires in.
Well, they did.
Well, no.
Roadie school. They missed that.
Yeah.
So, did you guys, I mean, we went through several transitions in broadcast. We went from mono, we went to stereo, we went from analog, we went to digital, we went from digital to high def, we went, and now we're making the transition to IP. So, how has that affected how you guys work? Are you still doing most things in analog? Are you mixing in analog? Are you delivering in digital? I mean, you can do.
I think for me, it's still a transition. I mean, when I started, we were totally analog. Then we went to a combination of analog and digital, because that was, since we worked a lot in video, we needed the digital format for them to post what we were recording. Then we went to DAWs, hard disk systems, and we're still kind of in that transition, but I can see working more with live bands and in broadcast. A lot of the work is switching to audio over IP, and that's I believe in a few more years we're going to see so much of that we're almost going to be forced into that. The thing that we've been dealing with for a number of years in live work is this analog transition between the PA companies and recording of broadcast trucks and the different formats that are available. All the different manufacturers have had their own particular, they either run in digital coax or digital fiber, or they're working in some other, arrangement of that. And I think with IP, we're gonna hopefully hit on a ground that everybody has got something they just plug one wire in and everybody's on the same address. It's protected and it's shippable to a lot of different locations, especially in networks like what Dave might be in, or broadcast centers, where you have so much data getting flipped around and it's all video and audio. The IP, I believe, will really be a good way to direct those and to make sure that the quality's good and it all knows how to talk to each other. Because I think communication has been the real issue for several years, and it's starting to straighten up a little bit.
The Audio Engineering Society came up with the AES67 spec a while ago, and that is being absorbed into the new SMPTE standards. Broadcast is about to go through a huge transition where they're getting away from running their videos through coax, and they're going to be running it down Ethernet. And as such, they're going to be doing away with embedders and debedders, and everything's going to get split out. And in many ways, Dante has led the way on how all that's coming together. So video is going to be shoved into the Ethernet pipe, and routers will no longer be a case. It's all this new SMPTE 2110 with -10, -20, -30. Watch out. Anybody that's building a new plant now, like KLRU is about to do, they're going to be looking at a whole new set of gear and equipment. The manufacturers are just now starting to tool up for that.
Is in the past, we've had at least 6 or 8 different competing standards for networking between audio gear. And that's been one of the killers, like between live sound and recording companies, trucks, and broadcast facilities. So an awful lot of people, while some, not all, some may be connecting between front of house and monitor world, perhaps with Ethernet or with fiber, you know, they still have to have, you can't expect a truck to pull up with 6 different network standards, digital network standards. But a lot of the people we deal with still, it's copper. They'll have digital consoles, but the vast majority of the people that, I still work with Malcom all the time. I have for over 40 years. And most of what we still see in the field is copper. And if, just because there's no interoperability between the standards, that's what an organization like the AES is for. And in conjunction with IEC and to set international standards, because it's just been a wasteland. There's been networked audio that's been, some of it, Sony got some with the Supermac, Hypermac stuff back in the 70s to where, I'm sorry, in the early 2000s to where it was fast enough to do multi-channel, high sample rate, high bit rate things, but no one, everybody is on a different page. And as David said, that's starting maybe to change.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Just in time for records to come back.
Yeah,
Yes.
there's talk about putting a vinyl plant here.
It's here already.
In Mosaic.
Well, no, I don't know about here, there's one,
In
there's
this
one in North
building.
Austin.
In
There's
this
one in North
building.
Austin
Yeah,
too.
well, maybe that's where they ended up.
But costs are part of all of it too, is even for some far more simplistic transmission. I do sports broadcast, and I have for 26 years, and I still do football for the University of Texas. When I started, I mean, we had an ISDN, a leased digital line actually, followed by an ISDN, which we still use as a primary. We've changed the actual box we use a number of times over the years. But most places we go to in the first decade of doing, there was no ISDN available, and it was cost prohibitive to drop it in for just going in for that one game. So we actually used, maybe on Comrex, the 3-line Comrex. They had 2-line, I'd only use 2 lines, but it was a frequency companding scheme, analog, where it would take, you get 7-8 kilohertz bandwidth by using 2 dial-up teleco pairs on it. And they get merged, and there's an equivalent box on the other end. And that was our backup, and on the road, that was our primary. And we just use a single-line coupler as the backup there. And that's gone to now, just within the last couple of years, because of costs, doing ISDN broadcasts have become so high, and there's no service being added, and service is becoming difficult everywhere. People are going over to IP systems on cost. So for about the last 3 years, we've run our backup for the UT broadcasts on an IP system, which at UT works really well, because they, since we're home radio, they give us a nice drop. You know, we're not sharing it with every reporter on the floor for the game. On the road, sometimes it can be a bit, most of the time it's been rock solid, but there are some schools that are just dropping ISDN, so we're having to go to that
The
strictly.
local operating companies won't provide it anymore.
Right.
Yeah, most of them are still providing it. They won't add service. That's all they'll do. And in some places, I know up in Missouri, I've heard from people that, it's being dropped completely up there, because one of the larger college sports networkers was based up there, and they've lost all of their ISDN. So far, you know, we're with IMG, and they still have it through their systems in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. But, I mean, we go back to them historically, ISDN, then the broadcast is fed ISDN, you know, old school stuff, to Dallas, the ballpark at Arlington, where it goes on the Texas State Network, hits satellite, and comes down. this Texas State Network provides all of the stations with downlink receivers.
And that's also, you can stream it on your Roku or
Yeah,
whatever.
well, our games are all streamed too, but we're talking about over-the-air broadcasts, you know.
Just getting it there.
60, 70 stations. But going from a telco line to digital ISDN, using whatever codec you choose to now IP, and there are a whole lot of codecs, software codecs within the box you use, from AACs to all sorts of things. But from a broadcaster standpoint, there are other issues with it too, and that's, you know, delay, latency, you know, which is higher on the IP because of the buffering that needs to be done to keep the throughput up, because it's a public, so a lot of people are on there, or with ISDN, it's a straight shot. You know, it's a dial-up service, so it's a one-to-one, where IP, it's all the network traffic you're fighting with. So they buffer these things to the max on the front end and then dribble it out. And it gets reassembled on a box on the other end, and that is still the problem with all the IP things. When you're trying to do high channel count, high bit rate stuff. The networks Dave is talking about are not going to be public type of networks.
Nope.
He's talking about
Closed.
closed circuit networks.
Especially since the Sony hack that happened not that
Yeah.
long ago. So security is also a big part of the 2110 SMPTE spec.
But there's just not enough throughput put on any of the public stuff, where in-house, you know, you can get astonishing throughputs on some of the stuff when you keep lengths down as well too. But so, I mean, yeah, it has changed, like I said, from telephone to, you know, the internet as you know it, and everything's streaming out.
But Bill brought up a good point, you know, pressing plants opening.
Yeah.
People going back to vinyl, people abandoning MP3.
Yeah.
Fraunhofer abandoned MP3, and they made it. So,
About a third of my work is keeping up old analog stuff. This mainly, I can never do it anywhere else, but in this town, there's so many.
Well, cassettes are making it. There's bands right now, garage bands are putting out a cassette,
I'm
so
a big
CD.
fan because it extended my career at least.
Yeah. Yeah, Chet, we both worked a lot on them, and the old machines, I don't know how much some of them get used anymore, but it's almost a requirement for a studio, a music facility in this town, to have an analog machine.
It's like photography, black and white or color.
Color.
It depends on what kind
It's-
of paper they want, Ilford, or and they want the butter sound of that analog, whether it's.
It's an effects box nowadays.
Exactly.
It's an effects
And
box.
and you can't get it with a plug-in. You can get pretty close, but not quite.
For my work, digital is really the way everybody's going. Mainly because in recording broadcast projects, they're long, and nobody can afford that much money for tape. So that format has almost completely disappeared. I sold nearly all my analog recorders 5, 6 years ago and took a vacation. My wife said, "You gotta sell those things, and I don't wanna get stuck with them." So we sold 2 24 tracks, 2 2-tracks, everything, alignment tapes, splicing blocks, the whole bit. And because I just was not using them, I was carrying them around the truck, and every blue moon, we'd have a client say, "Yeah, you still got analog machines on there?" And we'd go, "Yeah," but of course we would have to record 48 channels, so that means both machines had to be locked
16.5
together.
minutes.
And then you had to load huge reels of tape on there, and you had to change tapes every 30 minutes if you were running at, you know, faster speed. And it just got to the point that, you know, it was costing as much money to buy the tape as it was to hire us to do the job. And so that format has pretty much just gone out the door to us. I mean, you can buy a hard drive now and do a lot of recording for the same amount of money as you can buy one small reel of multi-track tape. And so that, digital's really the way we've gone.
Well, to put it in perspective, think about this, you know, a 16 to 17 minute recording will cost you $350 on a roll of 2-inch tape. And
That's 30 IBS.
at 30 IPS, yeah. And if you go to 15, you'll get twice that. And for something like what we do on Malcolm's truck for a live thing, we're doing a continuous thing, an hour and a half, 2 hours. So we're having to run overlap on the machines then. So we never get the 16 minutes out of it. You might get 10 or 12.
If you're an
You'd have to-
analog.
Yeah, if you're an analog, you're having to start, you'd have to start the machine. So the cost is just, it's nuts. Nowadays, people just reuse tape until you can see the light coming through it. That's what they do, you know. They can't do anything else but think about how much hard drive you can buy for $350. Yeah, you buy a big RAID array. So, but it's all gone down even to, Malcolm uses radars, which is still the last available multi-track hard disk system out there. That's a dedicated system. There's nothing else left. But there are some interesting things, you know, for streaming and for live sound. A number of companies have come up with some pretty cute answers. And a lot of it has to do not just with live recording, but for people live doing like virtual sound checks. A lot of live consoles are incorporating recording into them, primarily for that virtual sound checks. The band doesn't have to show up. The crew can go in and set up all the monitors, the in-ears, and the front of house can mix it, all from last night's show that was captured. And if it doesn't, there's company, everything from Joco, Allen and Heath, a German company, Cinematic has one. They even make a card that plugs into the back of the Behringer X32 that'll allow you to stream 32 channels on it. Behringer's come out with their own. Tascam has a 1 3/4 by 19-inch rack mount unit that'll record 64 channels streamed onto it, onto hard drives that plug into the front of it. Sound Devices, that's real big in the film video world, has a similar box that'll do 144 channels of networked audio as a hardware device. And a lot of this stuff exists because, as I've experienced, Malcolm's experienced, for a long recording, you'd better have something other than your Pro Tools rig running for long continuous recording. It's fine in the studio, but I think everybody's been bit.
There we go.
There's a question there. So doing a live recording, you always should have two systems running.
Absolutely.
You always do
What is
backup.
your first and what's your second systems?
We use Pro Tools for the primary, and then a new window, actually a Cubase now as our secondary system.
And for my system, we're using radar and a backup radar system, so we have multiple units. The radar systems are based in 24-track channel boxes, and they're a complete box with the clock, the A to D converters, and the recording device, and they run on a real simplistic operating system. It's a BLS system, and you link them together. So basically, you're working with a drive in each unit. And for what I do, after we get through, we pull the drives and transfer the drives. They write in broadcast wave files that are time-stamped with the time code we receive. And then we just transfer all that to one hard drive, and that can be opened up or imported into Pro Tools or any digital performer or any other kind of format.
So there'll be 6 of them racked up on the truck, 3 primary, 3 backup.
So we do 72 tracks is what we usually try to cover.
And that's a
Yeah, the board we're still using is an analog console. It's a 60 input, Rupert Neve, when he was working with AMEC. And that's my only analog, is analog there, and then once it goes into the radar, it goes through the converters and is captured in that format.
That's the most important stage.
Yeah, and that's the most important for what I do. Because if it's not a broadcast and we're capturing, it'll get posted somewhere else. And so at least they've got a really high quality, high res digital that they can work from.
We had a strange experience just a few weeks ago when St. Vincent came in, and they had only 4 musicians, but a number of tracks and such coming from some machine somewhere out in front of house. And it was a virtual sound check from the night before. And so before any of the actual musicians even appeared on stage, I was getting a feed from that to set levels in my recording. I was like, there's nobody out there.
Yeah, we talk about the virtual sound checks. We're doing live work, especially when I record music acts at the rodeo in Houston. Every night after rodeo is done, there's a music act in every night. And it's gotten to the point that if we do 21 shows, which is about what we do, 21 different bands, that maybe 7 or 8 of them show up for a sound check, and the rest of the time it's either a virtual playback like David says, which is always helpful, or it's the roadies out there. Here's the drums, oh, here's the bass player, here's the guitar.
There's some good roadies out there.
And you know, here's the vocal. And basically, you don't have anywhere to start from when you try to create a production mix for the show that night. You know, start with the vocals and build the band around it.
Live.
Yeah, live.
That's where I'm spoiled, is I get a good sound check, you know, every day, and I'm in a facility that's out of the weather. It's, you know, as long as, you know.
There's a lot of fly by the seat of your pants.
Yes.
A lot of times, you know. And some of the things, you know, you write off the first couple of songs. And hopefully you've got level, as far as, especially for a mix, if you're trying to get something, you know, out live. Oh, you know, you hope you've got preamp levels and things set well enough to where you're not slamming the tape machine or
It's not what you do, it's what you don't get caught doing wrong.
right.
And I think that's what Greg said, that flying by the seat of your pants is a lot of what we do. I guess that's the thrill of doing live work, especially if you're doing broadcast. Because a lot of times, bands have gotten real lazy about doing sound checks now that it's so easy to perform. And we just, a lot of times, you know, you get as much data as you can before a show. You know, you talk with the tech people, you try to get input lists, stage plots, you know, deal with your number of inputs you're dealing with and who's playing what on what songs. There's a lot of data like that. Luckily, Dave doesn't have quite that problem. He gets a little bit more information. But a lot of the work that we work on, you know, we don't get a lot of information.
Now it's ready to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, for the bands, so many of them have evolved into using in-ear monitors now and gotten away from the wedges. So the night-to-night differences in venues are almost non-existent. You know, they'll put up the station monitor guys will put up a couple of mics to pick up some ambience and the crowd for them to hear. Otherwise, you know, they're plugged up from the world, and every hall would sound exactly the same, so they don't need to be there, really, you know. And the ditch consoles that all PA is ditch, and they're recallable. So the engineer can just pop up his settings from last night, and it's just nothing but minor tweaking when the band starts. So there are virtually no sound checks nowadays.
Well, Murphy does get involved every once in a while.
Oh, yeah.
Have y'all had any Murphy experiences?
Probably every show.
That's where the crew comes in. I think one thing we've kind of forgotten about is that, you know, we may be the engineers or that, and some of us do a little bit of everything, not just the engineering, but I think the crew is so important to pull off live broadcasts. Without those people and knowing all the details of what it takes to make it work, and working with, you know, the band, the visiting band techs, those are the key people. I mean, I could never do the job I do without Greg and Chet, some of these other people I get to work with. And it's the same case in their, you know, their jobs. I mean, they have a key group of people that work together. They know the routine, they know the drill, and they psychologically can get along with the people. We've got a lot of different kind of personalities you have to deal with, and touring bands, and people that are on the road all the time.
Well, you've got the PA, you've got the band, and their techs. Then you've got recording. I'm usually working stage, because that's where the tech is. I'll do the interface, and I can deal with the guys in the PA, and I can deal with the instrument techs, things like that, and you build a relationship, and you make sure you always let them know it's their stage. And if, you have to approach it with an unbelievable, amount of respect for them and complete deference to them. And if you do that, they'll usually bend over backwards for you anytime if there's a problem with anything. But, there's a lot, we're talking about interfacing large number of systems with not only recording, PA, monitors, 3 consoles sitting there, running off the same microphone. What can go wrong there?
Ground.
We had a band that was playing so loud, and they had their own engineers, their own consoles, and they had their monitor desk into a UPS. And it was so loud, they didn't hear the alarm going off, that the power had gone out on what they were plugged in. And the band suddenly didn't have any monitors at all. It took a little, that was pull the rope, let's stop, fix that one.
The networked audio, probably the biggest problem that will solve potentially in the future, if it is standardized and everyone uses it, are things like microphone loading, which is a huge issue on stage. It's not just that you're looking at 3 consoles, each of those preamps in parallel, but you're looking at the capacitance of maybe 500 to easily 1,000 feet of cable between every one of those snakes going out there. And when it gets up to high frequency, all of a sudden a mic could be looking at maybe 250 ohms at 20 kilohertz as a load with the capacitance hanging there. So having a single preamp feeding a networked audio situation where each feed off of that will have some independent control. There's a lot, some of the AES people, there's a really, really, really good, if you want to see, because you don't want to know about, it's bad news on splits, but the best stuff out there is actually Bill Whitlock from Jensen Transformer and Jim Brown from Audio Systems Group. Does a lot of the Synod Cod and things and all that. Published probably one of the best papers back in 2005 on splits, on all the various ways to do it and the pros and cons. You can Google it, just microphone split and Whitlock, and it'll come up. It's on Jim Brown's site, on the Audio Systems Group site. It's the AES paper.
Is it a video?
No, it's a paper. You gotta read it. There are lots of diagrams, and there's no map. There's almost no map.
No, the reason I ask is because Bill has done some.
Oh, he's done stuff on it for years, yeah.
So-
That, and he and Muncie, the Pin 1 stuff, which none of the split people have even begun, forget about talking Pin 1 to anybody, in that world.
I just use a bunch of Y adapters. So.
Yeah. Well, no, they go into that. If you're close in,
It's okay.
on stage, feeding from the same power as the PA, sometimes a hardwire Y will work. And believe me, all PA companies use hardwire Ys to feed front of house and monitor world, all of them. But it's just that, like with a truck, chat a lot of times is very close. If you're carrying stuff in, but a Malcom's truck, we can be 600 feet away. And
It's a big truck.
and we're on different electrical. So it's a whole difference. Yeah, transformers and good ones at that point, because bad ones aren't worth it. You need ones that are electrostatically shielded. Because otherwise, you've got capacitive coupling, which is just,
Chet and I got Leon Bridges' guy last time we worked with them at ACL. He had all these old cool, he had a bunch of old cool mics. I said, man, that's really great, those really sound. I said, those are probably Pen 3, huh? And man, he came up, his head, you can see his head spinning. It was like, oh no, I may be out of phase.
Eddie Rose,
It sounded good, didn't matter. He had all the right ones in the right places, but we looked at him and told him that, yeah, that's probably back when it was still Pen 3 hot, huh?
But yeah, between, just the loading, when you look at typical mic pre's, historically have been in the 1200 to 1500 ohm range. You hang 3 consoles on that, and your best shot is maybe 500 ohms resistive before you get to the reactive component. Part of what Jensen and people were trying to do is get input impedances raised. That's gradually starting to happen. You'll see more and more PA consoles now coming out with 2500 to 3000 ohm input impedances. So that helps really lower it. If you have 3 consoles sitting at 3000 ohms each, you've got 1000 ohm resistive load if you want to conveniently forget the reactive portion. And that's good enough for a mic to drive. Where some of the others, condensers run out of steam when they're heavily loaded, the response doesn't change, but they'll clip. And dynamics vary all over the place, depending upon the load,
But
the frequency response.
They like to look at 150 to 300 hours.
Well, most of them don't want to see that. They want to see
That's what
6
their
to
output
8. Yeah, their output impedance, but normally they're designed to work into 5 times the output impedance as the load.
Yeah.
It's not like the old ribbons, the RCAs and stuff, you could,
Well, I just found that when they're loaded right, that the frequency response, when they sound better.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you'll find preamps nowadays that actually have variable loads.
Right.
Just for that,
Yeah.
some of
Two
the
switches.
high-end outboard pre's.
What about using the Ethernet connection to the microphones? Because then they can like, yeah, this is anything connecting a number of consoles, which, and they don't have an issue with the length.
Right. That's the, if people would standardize on a digital protocol,
But Dante.
but that's still not a standard
For all,
for all. We go out and we work with dozens of PA companies.
the AES67 is supposed to be is a standard for the intercommunication between the devices. So Dante is about the AES67, and the other formats also, and then they can be interconnected. But if you tell a huge array of microphones out there, you can have a box that all of them are using Dante to communicate between the box and the microphones. Now, from that box onwards, you can use about 3 standards to connect all this stuff.
Yeah.
My question is mostly related to, to do that, so the microphone now has an A to B and it has the interface because the digital
Right.
output of the microphone. And have to provide power.
It
as
exists now. It's used, it's just not highly standardized. Different manufacturers, what you'll have is on stage a box that, what was typically called a head box where everybody plugs in. That box will have the A to Ds in it. And
The new wireless mics are gonna be on the microphone.
yeah,
Right.
and then it's remote controlled, it's digitally controlled analog preamps in most of them, and it's controlled by the 2 consoles, and those consoles can be connected by either Ethernet or by fiber. And most people, everybody's got that now. Some of them still come out of those stupid boxes with copper, but multi-pair copper, but it is available. But if it was standardized, and it's not like you're going to a Digicode or to an Avid, the next gig or something. What's a remote truck and nav? You gotta have 5 interfaces, so when it is standardized, yes, the loading problems will cease to exist because you'll be looking at one preamp and just the stage cabling and none of the snake cabling to front a house or the remote truck. And that'll minimize, or it'll eliminate the loading
Some
problems.
standardized primary control protocol that's common across the platform.
Right, and hopefully that's coming with some of the AES standards, if the manufacturers follow it. So far, so many have been proprietary. Every PA company's, every digital console company has so far had their own, but that may be changing.
Well, I was gonna suggest we take questions, but Sergio beat me to it, so. Any other questions?
Yeah, can you discuss what your, normal when you roll up to a gig, what your workflow is?
Yeah, I can go into a little bit of that. I'll start a little bit even before that. Normally, a client will call me, and same for everybody, and we'll discuss what we need to do to make the project happen, you know, what their requirements are as far as the bands and the time frame and where the job may happen. And once that's established and we establish what it's going to cost them, for me, I send a contract out to get a deposit. And that's the most important thing, that you've got a deposit. And then I'll next probably contact the crew, make sure I've got the people that are going to be working with me. And I've been real fortunate to have a number of guys for a long time, so we all kind of know the gig, we know what we're supposed to do. And then after that, I will get in touch with the road manager or the front of house or monitor mixer with that band to get more details on what the band actually has as far as number of inputs, stage plots, instrumentation, and then we'll start talking technical. We'll find out if they have an analog interface or it's a digital interface, or how we're going to split the audio signals. Once that's determined and worked out, then it kind of goes back more to the production people that are actually producing the event. And if it's a broadcast event, then a lot of times, especially if it's television, I'll be in touch with the television director, the producer, and then technically it all kind of starts over again. I go to the TV technical people, and I'm talking interface with the TV truck, and are we in digital or analog, and what they want to get from me. Sometimes I need to receive time code sync. I need to get a video black sync to lock digital machines up with the video machines. And then there's other cross information that will go between us. And then when we finally get to the job, it's usually a prep day. A lot of times we'll have time to do all the technical broadcast, all the interface between us and the TV truck and satellite or the internet provider. And then the PA will arrive, hopefully on that same day. We'll do a technical interface with them, and then maybe on the second day, if it's a 2-day shoot, we'll actually see musicians come in, and maybe we'll get a sound check. If not, we'll do a virtual sound check or whatever we can get, and then we're into the production. And for me, after that, if it's a broadcast with recording, we'll do the live broadcast, and then we'll process the multi-channel audio, and that will get comprised and given to the client. And usually in a backup form. I usually never give the client the only copy. I give them a copy. I have either 1 or 2 backup copies. And sometimes we'll even thumb drive it if we've got thumb drives big enough to capture the audio, and somebody will take one of those just so we don't have anything all in the same place to get destroyed or damaged. Yeah. Does that help?
Yeah, that's great. So when you roll into one of these gigs, let's just say the rodeo, and you're talking with the various different teams and stuff there, how often does it come into a situation where you actually need to go out there and set up your own room mics to be able to capture?
Most of the time we will do that.
Okay, what do you guys use?
Sometimes it depends on the hall. Shotguns, dynamic mics, and an array of condensers. And depending on the size of the room and what we're trying to accomplish, if it's a surround sound potential broadcast, we may go and do microphones out in the hall just to catch some ambience. Kind of depend on that. It depends. The broadcast that we're doing in a few weeks for this 4th of July, we will probably capture that off of a combination of shotguns and dynamic mics off the front of the stage. A lot of times when you get into dispersed mics, you get into time delays in your audience. And for live broadcast, it's difficult to time align those. If you're doing it in a post situation,
Right.
you can go back and time align some of that, so you don't get a lot of strange reflections.
That was my next question.
Yeah, and it depends, but normally we try to keep it where we're trying to catch as much crowd as we can with a minimum amount of delay factor built in there, because we do get a lot of effect off the PA. I mean, you can't get around it. You're dealing with, the other thing about live recording, you're dealing with leakage, and you have to make it work. You know, if you're in a studio and everybody's ISO, it's one thing, but in a live situation, even with in-ears, you've got the potential for a lot of acoustic instruments, drums, one being possible amps, just, you know, if you're using horn players, you got that leakage, and then you've got the leakage of the PA, which is always gonna come back, no matter what you do. In a vocal mic, it's gonna be there.
We'll stick them up sometimes, more often than not, we'll also put them up at front of house, because that's just another option, and it's a fairly easy option. It's a secure place to put them, because they won't walk. We've had mics walk off with the audience members before. And we can usually steal a pair of lines from them and not have to run all the way from stage to front of house. You know, they'll usually have another couple of pair left in their multi-channel sync, so if possible.
That's their favorite thing to do, by the way.
Oh, yeah. If you have your own turnarounds.
Yeah, right.
You mentioned dynamic mics.
You know, SM57s, SM58s, some of the Beyers, Sennheisers, they all work. Each microphone has a little bit of a texture difference to it, and you may use condensers, and you know, you really need that blend of a different flavor, just like you would use different microphones in miking instruments or recording vocals. I think a lot of that is really into the audience sound. It's kind of a combination of different mics.
Plus, it's what they don't hear.
Yeah, right.
David Hough has spoiled all of us.
Oh, I am.
His room mics. He's got the best room mics because he's in the same room every
I'm
day.
in the same room,
That helps
there's
a
no
whole bunch.
wind.
There's no wind.
My, the lighting grid is exactly 50 feet above the ground, and I have little spots that I've already crossed. I can simulate the decatry for the surround feel, and it's exactly right in the middle of where the crowd is, just, you know, 18 feet
wonderful.
above their heads. And the mics aren't that expensive, they're just little bitty things that I drop down. They're choir mics that Shure makes, you know, MXR202s. And I put out an array of 8 of those. I mean, I could do 12, but I'm happy with what I get. And when bands have in-ears and they request it, I send that to their in-ears, and they're like, they can hear
Sounds
everybody.
great.
They love it.
I've got lots of audios.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, I keep it. I
get-
keep it. I cheat with it
Yeah,
all the time.
I ran into an engineer from Nashville who accompanied Dan Auerbach recently, and apparently I gave him some audience tapes back from the old studio years ago.
those are great,
He says
too.
they're still using them.
One doesn't have to reset them every night.
Yeah, no, that's what I said. That's why it's so good.
For doing ACL, how much audience cleanup do you have to do? As in cell phone, weird things like that?
Well, fortunately, these microphones
Like that?
are designed to where they don't pick up cell phones when they go buzzing and stuff or any of that.
Wait,
My
wait,
biggest
wait,
problem.
Wait, well, buzzing, yes, but cell phones ringing and
Well,
stuff.
cell phones are turned off on our tapings.
Okay.
They're supposed to be, but you know, we're not even supposed to do that. My biggest issue is in our bleachers. We have, when a person stands up, the seats go. So there are occasions I've had to go in and draw those out.
Yeah.
Usually the music is loud enough, I don't have to worry about that. But we've had some, you know, ballads.
So, I had a question about condenser mics. So since everybody's on in-ears now, are you using more condenser mics on stage? Because I always tried to avoid condenser mics around loud monitors and stuff like that? Are you using more condensers for non-audience?
Well, I've noticed more often it's the pattern of the mic. They don't want the tight supercards, they want the more cardioid. Because that way they can hear a more intimate sound of that's what they prefer to hear.
You're also seeing a lot of bands they may be using a rented PA company system. They'll carry their own microphone packages. And a lot of them will gravitate more and more to the same things that they use in the studio. So I'll see large diaphragm condensers instead in front of guitar stacks. I mean, it's all the time.
A lot of ribbons,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially nowadays.
Yeah, well, the rivers will handle a greater sound pressure level than they used to, and they have more output.
We should talk about, especially for you, Malcolm, what it's like to mix in a truck.
I like it.
Because it's not the environment that David has.
Right. The thing I like about mixing in the truck, for me personally, it's the same room, no matter where I go. I deal with a different location, a different band, a different acoustical environment. But what I hear in the truck, I'm used to working in that environment, and I trust. I don't listen on one pair of speakers all the time. I listen down to small speakers. I occasionally will listen on headphones. I try to make sure that, I'm kind of in the ballpark. But I feel very comfortable working there because I've been working in that truck. It was built in 1982. We had it acoustically designed by somebody who had built a lot of control rooms, a lot of trucks. So that was a good design to start with. And of course, I've gone through different monitors, I've gone through different equipment over the years. But basically, the acoustics I felt like were one of the most important things about building that truck. I wanted it to last forever, and I knew equipment would change, but the room I've gotten very accustomed to, and I'm comfortable, in mixing it.
Malcolm, you did get the same room, what about Bill and Chet? How's the room closet?
The broom closet. We had a good laugh about it.
Headphones.
Well, I've done all 26 years of the KGSR broadcast on a Fostex with a little mono box in front of it. And that's, my confidence monitoring thing is a 2-track with a D75 monitoring tape with a Y cord on the headphone output with 2 identical sets of headphones so that you and I can hear the same thing. We don't have to pass them back and forth. And then a mono setting on top of that rack. And that's my confidence monitor when I'm doing a live 2-track like that.
We've done some live streaming for some of our shows that are streamed only live, they're not forecast. And there's this, and so my assistant, Sharon will bring out her little iPhone and she'll bring up YouTube. And okay, so Terry Lacona's talking, doing the intro, and I mute the speakers in my control room, and it's like 30 seconds later.
At least.
Blah, 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 blah.
At least.
What about surround? So I know you're doing stuff in surround.
Yes.
And you mentioned doing stuff in surround in the truck. So you've made modifications to, your rooms.
Yep.
You've got subwoofers, or you're using
Yeah.
full range speakers.
Right.
And what about immersive audio? It's coming.
Immersive audio is included in the new ATSC
Right.
spec for broadcast.
Right.
And it's part of the SMPTE 2110.
Right.
And it's being discussed. I mean, it's gonna be theoretically available at your home.
How's that going to?
For my kind of show, I don't have any use for a ceiling speaker unless I want to put some kind of ambient, a ceiling, like my crowd mics could be, or I could put I don't know, I mean, it's interesting to see. The first time I heard an example, I went to an AES show years ago when 5.1 was first coming out, and somebody was giving a demonstration, because the 0.1 channel for the boom is a full range channel. And this fellow was experimenting with, well, let's use the full range up here, put a speaker, put a microphone in the ceiling of a recording of a chorus group in a European church. And I got to hear that. It was like, oh, that's great, that's cool. I'd love to see that. So to have that experience, now, is something like the Astrodome, oh my God, you could do.
Yeah, I don't know, I think, you know, I've been on some surround sound listening panels now that they're changing the name from surround sound to probably immersive. I've heard a note of that. But I think a lot of that is still more in the gaming, audio, and movie soundtrack particularly. I think it will be interesting to see what happens in the live format. I was talking to a friend several months ago that's been doing some work in Japan and in China, and they are into multi-channel immersive type broadcasts. It's run by the government, so it's very controlled, and he was going over to do some projects for them because they're doing surround sound broadcasts here, and they wanted to get some tech help to kind of, you know, say, this is somebody that does it all the time, how can we make it work better for what we're doing? And they had actually gotten one of the manufacturers, Lavo, sent a console over to Japan, and they rigged up a room, and they did a broadcast of genre music from Japan. So it was a little different from that standpoint, but it was an immersive. And I haven't really talked to him, but I saw him a few weeks ago, I think here in Texas, and he didn't have a lot of time to talk about it, but he said it was really an interesting environment to work in. He's not sure how soon it's going to take effect here, just because it's so new and experimental to that point.
I'll give you a heads up. There are some people that are planning to do some sports in immersive.
Wow.
So,
Yeah, that would be good.
Sports would make sense, because you've got the announcer up here.
you know, that's the other thing about ATSC 3.0. If they give you the ability, you could turn the announcer off. Or you could replace him with an announcer in your native language.
There you go.
Yeah. But they're not going to do that. They're not going to let us have that kind of control.
But broadcast has experimented with that for years, and they just keep. We did a NASCAR
Oh, there you are.
Uh-oh.
recording at Bristol, Tennessee. You know, and there, if you can imagine actually running the effects mics coming on Cat 3, not Cat 5, Cat 3 cable, and the condensers we were running on sound devices, the battery-powered preamps with phantom power. That was for up in the stands. The stuff to get the cars going round and round, we're using dynamics and just running those unshielded twisted pair all the way back. And when nothing was happening on the track, yeah, you could hear, because there's data coming down these lines and everything else too, bleeding into it. Not on the condensers, but on the dynamics. But believe when those cars start going, you can't be around it. I mean, I couldn't, it's the loudest thing I've ever experienced in my life.
It was louder than Ted Nugent in the metal days.
Oh, yeah. No, Ted was quiet. So I worked stage for Ted for years, but
I don't know, I
what
did the
they've-
rock rally on Congress Avenue. That was that.
Rock rally.
one of the guys from the television truck was down there with me when we were setting my stuff down there, and he even turned to me. He had worked the week before on an aircraft carrier just off the Atlantic coast, filming takeoffs and landings, and you know how loud a fighter jet can be at that range. And he said that the NASCAR track, when you're down in there, was worse than being on the aircraft carrier. That's how loud it was. Like I said, we had no problem running dynamics down. It was probably close to 1,500 feet of Cat 3 down there, not Cat 5. You know, the old 25 pair telephone lines, and not a problem for the broadcast. And then we did the same thing, basketball at Houston, surround sound experiments. They bring the truck in, But it never goes anywhere with them. You know, they try it when they think, stereo, yeah, but nothing else.
Any other questions?
Yeah. What was the favorite show that you've been able to work with that you can recall?
What I really enjoy are the artists that are the ones that after the rehearsal, they'll sit on the edge of the stage and just hang out and invite the crew to come up and chat with them. And, examples of that were, way back in the years, Carl Perkins was like, let's go get a pitcher of beer and go to the hole in the wall and shoot some pool. Or most recently, James Taylor was just that way. Like, just wanted to hang out with people. And then they come back and do a fabulous show with that same connection to the crowd. So the ones I enjoy that are my favorites are the ones that the crowd is totally pulled into the music and the environments.
What was the biggest train wreck then? And not on a personal level, I don't need to know.
On the record.
I'm talking
For me,
music, audio,
last season we did, the producers, trying to, run the jewels. The year before that, we had Kendrick Lamar. He was great. He came out, didn't have a single expletive to be removed. He had a full live band of these young jazz players, which was amazing because I could just solo up just the band. It was like a whole nother show. Amazing. And then last year we had Run the Jewels, and these two guys showed up with just a DJ, and the thing about DJs is coming out of like a laptop, and there's no limit to how loud it can get, especially the thump. And these two guys didn't even try to avoid the F-bombs. I ended up having to slice out I stopped counting at 160. And the entire night as the performance went on, our subs on the floor, it turned out we're only on a 20 amp breaker. So we had to send somebody out there to keep flipping the breaker back on. That is the most recent annoying one.
children's music.
Yeah.
Any other stories like that from others?
What about Neil Young?
Neil Young was interesting. Actually, Malcolm provided his truck when Neil Young first did a taping and Neil was into digital way early on. And he had a machine just like the one from John Moran out of Houston Digital Services. And we ran a split down to the Malcolm's truck to hit that machine. A few years ago, we were doing mixes for New West Records, and they had heard from Neil Young that digital copy that Neil had. Oh, that was the night that we were still recording on reels that we had to change every 30 minutes. And we asked him, well, should we stop the bands when we do reel changes? He says, no, don't stop the band because we have it downstairs on a digital machine that's nonstop. Well, it turns out the digital tape either was destroyed in a fire or was unplayable. And they called us up and said, we have this one song. Can you send us that one song? And I was looking through my track sheets and it was between reels.
You did the Sonoma thing, Neil, right?
Yeah.
Chet did.
The what?
The Sonoma.
Oh, yeah. No, that was John Hyatt.
Oh, it's Hyatt, that's right.
It was a master of disaster. My theory about surround, because I mix a lot in surround, is because I'm a child of quad when that came out. I call it quad with a sub and a center channel. And that my whole goal in doing it and mixing it is to, get back in the band. It's like that feeling that you have playing on stage.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and my goal is to wrap the band around you somewhat and bring the audience into it, so that if you're sitting on the front row center, right in front of the vocalist, that you would hear like this, you know, it goes by you and you're in it, which I guess they're calling that immersive now. The problem with that is that once you do that, and that's what the problem I had with the New West series for ACL was that I loved doing that so much that the stereo was a problem. Going back to stereo, you know, I was like, oh, it's only stereo.
It's environment specific to listening to it.
Yeah, that's right. Well, over the years, the first one to admit that I do this to make myself happy.
Yeah.
And that, you know, fortunately, that usually works. Take good people with me, you know. If we're doing something live, we've got Bill, and I've done a number of things with Malcolm and with Greg, and that my goal is for a good show, a good recording, or for something for me to hear while I'm doing it. And that requires that everybody on stage be happy, because if the band is happy, you get a better recording.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that kind of all of us have to deal with, is that we're really here to try to capture something with excellence. I think anybody that gets into the music business wants an excellent product. The musicians do, the production company do. When it comes down to the engineers, we're really there to do the same thing. We in a sense, we are trying to please ourselves, but our real goal is to have something that's excellent, that we can be pleased with, that we've really given it our best. Because I think we've all been created for excellent things. And each person here does things excellently. You know, they may not be all in music, they may not all be in what we've maybe talked about, but each of us has been created with an excellent character. And we really have to look internally to that and know that we've been created that way for excellence, so that our product ends up being an excellent product for all generations to either experience, work with, or enjoy. And it benefits all the people that we get to work with.
Mm-hmm.
I got one. Sorry, I got a lot of them. This one actually comes back to ACL also, just because I know that when you're doing recordings with like live trucks and stuff like that, it's probably a different situation. But as far as ACL, where it's supposed to be a live capture type thing, how many times, or how often do you have artists saying, oh, we want to redo the vocals, and we want to retrack this, and we want to retrack that?
Well, we're getting bands that are on tour.
Right.
And they have their show is down, pretty much. Our instructions to them are pretty simple. It's like just, you know, we've taped over the tally lights. They don't know which camera is on. We say, don't play to the camera, play to the crowd like you always do. Just ignore the cameras, if possible. And just run your show straight down. Don't stop, keep it flowing. Sometimes, you know, if like we had a band the other day that they were used to doing segues from song to song to song, and we said, if you could, break that up so that we have something to edit later on. If, by chance, okay, at the end of the show, they come back and do encores, and our instruction is, if there's one or two songs that are, you know, for whatever reason, they're new songs, there was something messed up, redo those songs after the encore or in place of the encores. Beyond that, there were rare instances where they might want to come back in and punch something in, like a bass player. But now that it's digital, it's almost like copy-paste. I can fix that, you know, tell me where it is, I'll fix it in post. Very rarely is it an overdub. And it really depends on the level of the complexity of the band and the producer. Don Henley was a little bit more involved in wanting everything perfect. And his producers just took everything away, and they had all kinds of folks, you know, who used to be film sound effects guys who are now working for Don to go off and replicate whatever fancy reverb was on that guitar for some solo. Yeah, good one. I wouldn't know, you know, there's no way I would even bother doing that.
Right.
we were in a live festival one time, they were streaming, and one of the artists, we were told in advance that he didn't sing in tune a lot. And so when we recorded the show, and then I came back after the show, and with their front of house guy, we remixed his entire show without his vocal in the stereo mix. And then we took his vocal and they shot it off to his engineer in LA that night. And he retuned all the vocals, sent back the tuned vocals, and then we just laid the vocal back in so they could stream the program the next day before the festival was over. And
Did they have like the bleed that got pit?
Yeah.
yeah, it really wasn't that crucial. Luckily, everybody was in ears,
Yeah.
and there wasn't a lot of stage leakage.
Yeah.
And
That
that
happened
helped.
before where the.
I don't know how much they retuned, but they did feel like
They
they
got
had,
happy.
They were happy they had the opportunity to retune his
Very
vocal.
good.
Well, you guys must run into things where singers are singing into auto-tune rack mounts. And so everyone's monitors on stage have a hideous live vocal, but the front of house is getting a nice tuned vocal. I won't name any names, but I know it happens. So you must run into that at least.
The
right?
only time we've seen in our show an auto
Try
tune
not
is
to.
as a special effect for one particular song, for maybe the chorus. And
That's
that's,
good. That's cool.
and that's what they want,
Yeah.
that particular bit, and it's, it's tricked out.
We had one show at the rodeo on a particular group that was known for good vocals, and they weren't very good. And they basically auto-tuned all the vocals live. And we had the tuned vocals. They didn't even give us the live vocals for our mix. They said, this is what you need to take for your mix. And that's all we got, tuned vocals.
Well, that's what we end up having that on the radio shows a lot of times, that the group will come in and take down whatever the lead vocal or the vocal mic is, plug it into their processor.
Box.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's what you get.
Don Henley, I shouldn't be picking on him. Every one of his songs was to a click track. That click track was coming out of a computer. And when we had rehearsals, Don had laryngitis. There was a fader with somebody else's name on it. That was his reference track. So that was also available to his folks when they had post-production. But I must say that they actually did use his live vocal when they did the final mix.
That's cool.
Any stories of inadvertent live mics? People not aware they're on mic?
Sunshine.
Broadcast.
You have to be real careful with audience mics in a live stream, because the guy's sitting around getting ready for the next act or the what, and the internet is always on. Whereas the radio, there's somebody back at the station turning the radio on and off. But the stream on the internet, and when one of your kids comes and says, hey, my dad's listening in Florida, and he says he can hear everything you're saying. That will get you in trouble.
Not in music, but in sports, one of my worst moments was having a live mic up our sidelines reporter as Texas was scoring the winning touchdown, Vince Young in the Rose Bowl, and our sidelines reporter let loose. And believe me, that was probably the worst day of my sport engineering career. Luckily, they were able to, for our poor, suffering play-by-play guy, Craig Way, they were able to sort of edit that. So for his highlight reel stuff, for playbacks, he's got a clean copy of it. I was in the doghouse for a long time on that one, believe me.
But you couldn't read his mind and anticipate it.
Yeah, well, the fader shouldn't have been up. That's the problem. But.
There's the PCM you guys put up at the Saxon Pub.
Yeah.
And on the wall, and the guys at the table underneath it were doing a Coke deal.
Through the internet.
It was the first simultaneous 14-4 And 300K screen.
Uh-huh.
History in more ways than one.
It was high five.
Oh, I was gonna say, one of you said you bring up the vocals and you build around it for the recording process. Do you all have some similar sort of process, or some of you groove up first, you know, to make the whole thing jive level-wise?
I think for me, talking about the vocal and broadcast, if I get a sound check with a band and I've got a pretty good balance, I'm really trying to make the bleed of the entire band work as a balance structure, because you're not dealing, like I said earlier, in a studio where everybody's isolated. So I think it's important that you kind of get a feel for what that vocal part adds to the song. And a lot of it depends on the genre. I mean, in some genres, you know, the vocal is buried. In some genres, it may be real up front. It really depends on, a lot of times, the performance even. I have a tendency when, in a live situation, if I'm hearing a vocal out of tune or something that doesn't really work, I try to help as much as I can, either with either ducking it down or maybe some effects or some delay, just to kind of help make it as best as it is. Because I mean, in a live performance, sometimes you never know what's going to happen, especially vocals, and so you have a tendency to be cautious with that vocalist.
I've done it both ways, and one example I have for that is years and years ago when we first did the Neville Brothers. And you know, on the console it usually starts off with the drums and the bass and the rhythm section. And I remember setting up that mix in post-production, and I'm starting with the drums, and oh man, this is sounding great. And I get to the vocals, and it's like, yes. And I just decided it wasn't working for me, so I reversed my thoughts. I dumped everything back down, pulled all the faders down, and just worked with the vocals. Nothing else, just, and then I started bringing things up around that. So it really depends on who the band is, the genre, and all that. You gotta try them both ways.
And the amount of bleed into what, because there are phase relationships then between.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing too about, especially with live things, it's not like the studio where things are totally isolated to where first thing somebody does, go hit the solo button and start EQing the track. Well, that works in the studio when you've got isolation. But with live stuff, when you start changing it, you're not changing that instrument's bleed into another mic. And so EQing even.
And you can't afford to miss what's probably going on while you're messing with that.
But just because you are truly working with lots of bleed, and it's everything from the mics on stage to having to keep a certain amount of ambience happening overall, so you're getting a certain amount of, shall we say, front of house bleed that's way down there, but still that impacts everything, because that's what everything's being picked up multiple times from multiple places, and it basically has to be dealt with as a whole and not as the individual pieces that you can slice and dice in the studio when you're going one track at a time into your Pro Tools rig, and you can sit there and hammer each track with 6 different plugins to your heart's content.
You mentioned phase relation. So I used to run sound when I cut my teeth years ago in Los Angeles, and you're in a room, a giant room with a band playing, and the amount of phase you deal with is, okay, maybe flip something. But in a situation where you're actually like in your truck and you have great monitoring, so now you can actually hear all the different phase relations. What are some of the tools that you use? Is there anything beyond just flipping a channel and testing it that way? Are you using any other tools whatsoever to mess with phase to help bring things together?
There really isn't much you can do. The fader's about all you've got.
Okay, well, I mean, there's some like phase boxes out there and stuff. Some hardware phase boxes that occasionally you come across.
Well, the desk I use also has, besides the phase button, has the ability to dial in delay.
Yeah.
Right. For example, and I've gotten, I've messed with it and I've gotten frustrated with it and just, given up. But it's kind of fun to play around with for a little while during sound check when I had the time. For example, we'll have a bass DI and a mic on the same amp.
Right.
They sound completely different. Obviously, the DI is the earliest thing to arrive, so I'll take I'll put them both up and try to, get them the same loudness, and then start flipping the phase and putting a little delay on, trying to find the sweet spot, and then put it back in phase, and I'm playing around with all, this, and there's so many different, types of tones that you can derive from that, and it's like, pick one, or.
Yeah. It's like part of the overall color.
Yeah.
Probably the best example of some music that does utilize the delay for the purposes intended. A lot of classical, there'll be a main array, whatever array they choose to use, and then X number of spot mics. And in an orchestra, there are substantial differences between the conductor and the main pair and these spots, maybe all the way back to percussion, French horns. So it's used a lot there, because you can align those then with the front when you're bringing your spots. So that's been a standard in classical and orchestral stuff since the beginning of digital stuff, because most digital machines have always had the ability to at least, on the order of, some of the old ones could only go 10 or 20 milliseconds. Most of the later ones a lot more. Either way. So, yeah, it has been used, but in pop stuff, it's, what is it? It's not like it's just back on the percussion. Everything can be so loud up there. Think about going in like drum kit. You can't even think about a lot of drum kit as a snare mic or something. You got to treat it as the whole kit, because everything's bleeding into everything else so much.
Would you ever delay the drums to match the vocal bleed? Like by however many feedback it is? I mean, I've never done that, but does anybody ever do that? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No.
Like I say, in orchestral stuff, I've done it percussion.
Yeah.
To align,
So there's
like
not-
the temps and stuff, because the temps and stuff will be being picked up by a mic that's maybe 4 feet, 3-4 feet above them. That's gonna hit the machine first.
Right.
Then it's gonna be about 30 milliseconds before it hits the main pair
Yeah.
that everything's coming off of. So yeah, you line it there and you get the delay down within, it's called the Haas window.
Yeah.
And, go from there.
You still run into the problem that you're changing phase relationships that's in the bleeding. in the
Right.
microphone. So
It gets complicated.
it screws something else
Yeah.
up. You fix it one thing, it screws something
You're
else.
screwing something else up, yeah.
But the biggest guide that I use if I'm doing a live broadcast or working on a live recording is how the stage was set up. And I visualize it that way. If I don't stray too far from that, then it seems to, the perspective seems to stay in phase. And if you're doing something live and you're having a problem with it, what we learned a long time ago is like you add something to it. So if we've got a guitar amp or whatever, add another mic, that's not there normally. Right? So but try not to fool around with, especially on the broadcast, anything that fools around with, well, it's in phase or out of phase, but, with varying degrees of phase or delays.
We are coming up on 2 hours. And I don't know how long you guys want to talk, but I think it's time to wrap this up. But anything else you guys want to share
I've
before
got
we?
a question.
Yeah.
How do you, in a festival situation, multi-stage, more than one band playing at the same time, how do you deal with that?
Go home.
You mean leakage-wise?
Yeah.
It's the wind direction.
Right. Well, when we work on the ACL festival,
Yeah.
there's 8 stages. And we happen to be on one of the bigger ones, and the way they've got them spaced out, I mean, sometimes there's not anything you can do. I mean, it's gonna leak in there, and they try to time the bands so that close stages don't play at the same time, but that's not always the case. And we've certainly done headlining acts where you can hear the other act that happens to be playing at the same time, especially when there's no music happening on your stage. You know, break in 2 or 3 seconds, it's like, oh, where'd all that come from? And there's not a lot you can do about that. I
Well,
mean,
Robert Plant and Alison Krauss versus Beck was not a good one. That was not a good lineup there. Alison Krauss and Robert Plant lost. Period. And they were all the way at complete opposite ends, but both stages, both of the main stages do go at the same time at late at night for the headliners, and Beck won, hands down.
I live up in the neighborhood, and we sometimes.
He
hear
won
all-
up there too.
All the stages and all this thing. Oh my God. Just take a road
Well, I
trip.
record backstage, and some of those recordings end up on the broadcast CD.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And it's, a lot of times it's a matter of scheduling, or I hear a band take a break and say, play a song real quick. Sleep fast. I've gone to tighter mics as a result. I don't put condensers on people back there backstage like that because I'm off to the side of the stage. So what I'm getting is the worst possible. I'm getting all the backwash off the subs. So. But then I convinced Shaky Graves last year to be on it by just telling his guy, Nick and I minimized it substantially, but I just told him, I said, hey, he's an Austin boy, it's an Austin festival. How could it not be some bleed? And he said, you're right. And he loosened up on us and passed it, and it ended up being on the CD. So.
There you go.
Anything else you guys want to share before we wrap this up? All right, well, how about a hand for our panel? Before everyone leaves, if you have not signed in, please sign in. We want to be able to keep in touch with you, and we get your email address this way, and we're able to let you know about the next meeting and the meeting after that. Anyway, thank you guys. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. How's your mix turned out?
Pretty good. I didn't do a whole lot. I mean, it's pretty good. I did get the radio sticks in hand. When it pulls it out of the thing, I'm like,
Usually
during the evening or during the day. It's very much got a strong. I mean, if we did Baird would ever, like Baird by himself is just a weird guy with flavor. And with Bill kind of driving us into this sort of like quasi-industrial intensity. There's a lot of mystery, a lot of layers. And it's like, okay, it's one of those figures.